police state for over 200 years. And I guess if your goal is to build a big, giant, powerful police state, you've been very, very successful. And so my task is to talk about it in 30 minutes. That's going to be very difficult, so I'm going to move pretty quickly here. I think people's attitudes about whether we're becoming a police state or whether we are a police state. I mean, first, let's get this straight. I mean, we are a police state. There's just no question we're a police state. And if you're not sure about that, you can ask some of my clients who I've talked to for over 20 years. And you might ask me if you didn't know me, hey, Mark, how can you represent people like that as a criminal defense lawyer? But I'm here to tell you, and I think this is a horrible commentary on the state of our society. The vast majority of my clients, and I do major felony cases, the vast majority of my clients, I wouldn't mind one bit if they were living next to me and my wife and my kids. And that's, to me, a horrible commentary. I can't tell you how many times I'm standing in court and talking to the judge about how much time a person's going to get in jail or prison, and I turn around and I say, look, Judge, nobody's even upset with this guy. There's not even anybody here who's mad. Nobody's been hurt. Nobody's been trespassed upon, but yet this human being is going to be locked away in a cage. Nonetheless, I think that there isn't just a case for pessimism. I think there is a case for optimism. And I'm an optimist, and so I am optimistic about the future. Now, I'm trying hard to be an optimist, and it is difficult, I'll admit. I'm not going to lie to you. But so let me start with the case for pessimism, as if you didn't know the case for pessimism. But there might be some of you among us who are naive enough to think that the Constitution is going to protect you. I'm sorry to inform you about this. The Constitution isn't going to protect you from anything. It's never been able to protect anybody from anything. They are merely words written down on a piece of paper. And any creative person, let alone a creative lawyer, can get anything they want out of the Constitution. So for all of you who think, well, we just sort of need to get back to the original meaning of the Constitution, that isn't going to work. To me, the only thing that matters, if you're interested in a free society, the only thing that matters is, do you have a significant percentage of the people with whom you live that have in their hearts and minds a desire for freedom? That's all that matters. I don't care what's written down. You got people you live with who are for freedom, you're going to have a free society. And the reverse is true as well. Today, unfortunately, we have a huge, significant amount of people who are just simply for cradle-to-grave welfare state. That's what they like. They're for big government. They don't call it tyranny, but I would call it tyranny. And I think I can make a case rather easily that that's exactly what we have. And if that's what your plan is, all you got to do is take a look at the Constitution and find something that is a source of power for the government. Just go through it. They're real easy. You could start with Article 1, Section 8, right? That's where we list out those very strictly limited powers of the Congress, right? We have a government of very limited powers. Remember that from junior high? Strictly limited. Our federal government can only do these things laid out in Article 1, Section 8. Bam, 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 bam. And anytime you find one of those, just interpret it in a way that's broad. That's very expansive definition. Then, of course, there are areas in the Constitution that include your rights, or what you thought were your rights. But that's easy. All you got to do is strictly construe those. It looks like it means this, but no, it doesn't really mean that. It means something else. So let me give you some examples of this. You know, if you look in Article 1, Section 8, you might find something that looks rather harmless, and it seemed like a great idea at the time, I'm sure. Let's make a huge free trade section called the United States. Let's not have one state erecting tariffs against another state, right? So in Article 1, Section 8, Congress has delegated the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations in among the states. Sounds pretty harmless, right? Did you know the entire federal drug war is based off the rights of the federal government to regulate interstate commerce? Did you know that the federal government could prosecute you for smoking a marijuana cigarette that you grow in your backyard and use on your property under the power in Article 1, Section 8 to regulate interstate commerce among the states? That's how it's been interpreted. Did you ever wonder where the federal civil rights acts come from? The power to regulate interstate commerce. Well, how on earth can you get, say for example, how can the federal government get jurisdiction over some restaurant to enforce civil rights laws? No problem. Is that restaurant connected to a road? Is that road connected to another road which people in interstate commerce may travel upon? Now you've got jurisdiction. And that's how your interstate commerce clause has been defined. And by the way, I'm not making this stuff up, and I'm not even getting it out of books I read. I'm talking to you about cases that I've had. I once had a case involving prostitution in the federal court. My guy was charged with a federal crime involving prostitution, and yet there was absolutely no activity whatsoever in any state other than Arizona. In fact, there wasn't even anything that occurred outside Maricopa County. So I brought a motion to dismiss, saying, hey, the federal government does not have jurisdiction to deal with this case because there's nothing here affecting interstate commerce. You know what the judge found? And by the way, the judge was right on the law. The judge said, well, Mr. Victor, the prostitute used a condom, and that condom was made in another state. I knew I was going to lose this motion because I was aware of those cases. And that's not all. Your guy used a telephone, and the telephone is connected to interstate commerce as well. So you lose for a second reason. That's the interstate commerce. But the federal government has all, and by the way, there is nothing, absolutely nothing. If I was the federal government and I wanted to do anything, and by the way, I've had this discussion with United States attorneys. I've said, do you think the federal government could prosecute DUI cases if they wanted? He said, why couldn't we? Cars travel in interstate commerce. Cars are made in other states. Why would we have any problem whatsoever? I said, can you think of any crime at all that the federal government could not prosecute if it wanted to? He said, no, there's always some connection to interstate commerce. The powers of the federal government are broadly interpreted. I could tick off tons of these. The power to borrow money. Is there going to be any limit there? I guess we'll find out if there's going to be a debt ceiling increase. Who thinks there won't be a debt ceiling increase? Well, wait, there's only been 91 so far. Who thinks there's some limit? The limits of the federal government to tax and spend are limited only by economics, which we're going to find out sadly down the road. Of course, the Congress has the power to declare war, so that means if we don't have a declaration of war, we can't go to war, right? Enough said on that one. You got a right to a jury trial. Everybody knows that. That's one of your protections. Did you know that the government also has a right to a jury trial? That's been interpreted. I've walked into court and decided in some of my cases, hey, judge, my client wants to waive his right to a jury trial because I've got some technical legal issue that I want to try to the court. And the judge, I remember the first time this ever happened, I was a young lawyer. The judge turned to the state and said, what's the state's position on that? And I said, Judge, why should the state have a position on that? It's my client's right to a jury trial. He said, well, it's sort of been interpreted, too, that the state has a right to the jury trial as well. We got a whole huge federal criminal justice system, a monstrosity of criminal offenses. I don't know, and nobody knows how many federal criminal offenses there are. Nobody knows. There is no number you could possibly point to. And yet, there are 3 crimes in the Constitution. There are only 3 crimes. They have the power to declare anything a crime. There's nothing that's off limits. They can watch, listen to, spy, search, seize virtually anything for virtually any reason. They just call it the war on terror, or the war on drugs, or the war on poverty, or the war on whatever you want. You just pick it. We lead the world in incarceration rates. You know, we're great at singing songs about being the land of the free. Any of you sing those songs? We're the land of the free. Yeah, we're great at pledging allegiance and saluting the flag and talking about our great freedoms. We're fantastic at that, but we don't walk the walk. We're great at talking the talk. But I ask you, how on earth can we possibly even pretend to be the land of the free when we lead the entire world by far in incarceration rates? And I'm not just talking about raw numbers. By percentage of population, we lead the entire world. There's no country that's even close. I remember in law school when constitutional law, my professor would say, well, the states have the right to regulate health, welfare, safety, and morals. And I would say, where's that? Well, it's always been interpreted. Well, where does it come from? There's no answer to that. I don't know. I can't tell you. What about a traffic stop? Anybody here drive a car? Oh, if you drive a car, they own you. They own you. I don't think you understand. I do speeches that go for 2 hours just on how to deal with a traffic stop. And you know what I think your goal is? To not be killed. Forget about the ticket. Take the ticket and move on. You live in a police state. You know you live in a police state. If you didn't know, I'm here to tell you. You live in a police state. Now, if you want to stay, there's a transaction cost to living in a police state. Look, there are other benefits to living in a police state. This state, Arizona, has nice weather. You could go to the Grand Canyon when the federal government's open, which I hope never happens again. So there are reasons to live here. But if you live here, know that you live in a police state, know that there's a transaction cost, and if you get a ticket for some stupid reason, suck it up and move on. Don't try to get out of it, because you don't know who you're dealing with. Anybody can be pulled over at any time for virtually any reason. I could tick off reasons here that you never even heard of. And it doesn't matter what they're thinking. It doesn't matter that they're thinking, woo, you just left Doug Casey's weekend convention. You must be a bad guy. Let's follow him down the road and see if he's weaving within a lane. Yeah, tires didn't even cross the line. Weaving within a lane. You mean, officer, that the tires weren't perfectly parallel to the line the entire time? Yeah, that's a traffic stop. Get them all the time. Well, then they can detain you. They can get you out of your car. They can get your passengers out of the car. Did you know they can now make you answer questions about firearms? And if you refuse to answer, it's a crime. What? I thought there was something about you had a right to remain silent. No, not in Arizona. You have to answer the question about the firearm. And not only that, you got a firearm? You're one of those troublemaker gun nuts who wants to carry a firearm when you could call the police and get them to come help you or shoot you? Did you hear that story the other day? Crazy person in the Capitol shooting gunshots off. I thought, man, somebody must really be upset about the closure thing. Did you hear this story? You know who the gunshots were by, right? The police. The police were the crazy people shooting the gun at the lady who was unarmed with the infant in the car, driving erratically. They killed her. I do civil rights now. I get phone calls almost every day that blow me away. We got police officers now who are dressed like the guys I served with when I was in the Marine Corps. The sheriff of this county has a tank. And it's for the war on drugs, a victimless crime. Who's he using the tank against? They can make you hand over your firearm just because you have it. Wait a second. You mean without even any cause? no showing you've done anything wrong, no warrant, no reasonable suspicion, no probable cause, no reason to think there's any problem at all, and the man with the shiny badge, or the woman with the shiny badge representing the government, can force you, a free American, so you thought, to hand over your firearm just because they'd be more comfortable. Anything wrong with that? Anybody upset about that? That's a seizure of your property with no cause. I'm upset about that. Then they bring the doggy. If you guys understood what's going on with the drug dogs and the drug searches in this country, you'd be outraged. I think people would be rioting in the streets. Because if they bring the dog, you're dead. They're going to search if they want to search. A friend of mine, Barry Cooper, some of you may know Barry Cooper, used to be he was one of the most prominent drug cops in Texas. This guy smashed more doors, used more drug dogs, trained people on drug dogs. Long story short, he smoked a joint for the first time in his life and said, "Is this what I've been smashing in doors for and hauling people to jail and prison?" He couldn't believe it. So he retired, switched to the other side, and became an expert. I used him on some of my cases. You know what he told me? He said, "Mark, any officer could get the dog to alert at any time for any reason at all. And that's a real alert." Do you know what the Border Patrol tells me about alerts down in Yuma? They got two possible alerts. One of them is if the dog changes his respiratory pattern. This is a German Shepherd who's running around, moving cars, coming to a stop. He's running in and out from lane to lane. If he changes his respiratory pattern somewhere in there, that's an alert. And of course, only the dog handler is skilled enough to tell if the dog has changed his respiratory pattern. You know what the other one is? A change in posture. I kid you not. If you don't believe me, go to YouTube and search my name and put Border Patrol in there. You'll find my cross-examination of the Border Patrol officers. Well, if Fluffy alerts, or said another way, if the dog handler says that Fluffy alerts, they're going to tear apart your car, the entire thing. And there's nothing you can do about it. And there's no warrant. You can be ticketed and fined for a multitude of things. And if you don't pay, they're going to take your license. And they're going to haul you off and your car off because it becomes a crime. Tell me we don't live in a police state when they can do that. None of us, not one of you, could leave here today with complete confidence that you are going to be free from being molested by the police. And let me say this. I think it's error to lump all police officers together. You're hearing this from me, and I'm telling you, there are some good police officers out there. I call them peace officers. There are good guys and gals out there wearing badges and guns who are really looking for bad guys as defined by people who hurt other people. But you don't know who you're dealing with. And then there's the Gestapo out there. You don't know who you're dealing with. What about your rights? Oh my God, time's going fast. What about your rights? You got a right to free speech, right? Yeah, sure you do. But they can regulate time, manner, place restrictions on free speech. They can stick you in a cage in the corner, right? Free speech zones. What about your Second Amendment? I just heard a little bit about that. Yeah, you got a right to keep and bear arms, but it's constantly under attack, right? Permits, background checks, not this kind of a weapon. They can take it away for anything they say they can. Now, domestic violence, right? If you get into a shouting match with your spouse or your kid and the police come and you get hauled off for disorderly conduct, because that's all it takes for disorderly conduct. It's, as far as I'm concerned, it's a crime to get into an argument today. If you're found guilty of that, or you plead guilty because you want to get out of custody, which a lot of people do, you just lost your rights completely to possess firearms. But then there's the Fourth Amendment, right? Absolutely, you are protected against unreasonable searches and seizures. You are. But another way to say it is like this. This is how I say it, and it's got the same meaning. But I think it helps you understand the nature of the protection that the Constitution affords you. The government can search or seize anyone or anything anytime it wants, so long as the government decides that what the government did was reasonable. That's what it means. And you know what they've decided down at the border? If it happens at the border, it's reasonable. Now, you guys laugh, but this is the truth. If it happens at the border, it's reasonable. Another way to say that, the Fourth Amendment has been deleted from the Constitution at the border. And don't think that the border is the border, right? The border is wherever they say. 100 miles in, that's still the border. They can define the border any way they want. Not to mention there are checkpoints internally now that are perfectly constitutional and acceptable. There's the Fifth Amendment, right? You can't be witness against yourself unless it's a DUI case. In a misdemeanor DUI case here in Arizona, you don't want to provide evidence against yourself. You got a right to that, except that they will hold you down and extract your blood for the sole purpose of being used against you in a criminal offense. But they have interpreted that differently. Even though our Constitution here in Arizona says you are not forced to produce evidence against yourself, they have interpreted that to mean only statements, not your own blood. The Fifth Amendment, life, liberty, and property without due process. There used to be an argument in America about what due process meant. Was it substantive due process? In other words, does the court actually look at the infringement of your rights and determine if it's reasonable, if it's justified, the burden's on the state? Or is it just procedural due process? A notice and a right to a hearing. But that's not where we are today. Eric Holder made a statement about due process, and what he said, quite correctly, is it doesn't say judicial due process, it just says due process. He's right about that. It really doesn't say judicial due process. So I guess Eric Holder thinks that your life, your liberty, or your property can be taken away by non-judicial process. What does that mean? Eric Holder and some of his flunkies sitting around in the executive branch decide, well, let's take away this guy's life, liberty, or property, and you have now been afforded due process. Or does it even have to be Eric Holder and some of his flunkies? Could it be the dog catcher? How low down the chain does it go? That's the debate that we're not having in America that we should be having. I could go on and on. You got the Eighth Amendment right against excessive bail. Really? Do you know how many cases I have that have $1 million bails put on them? Or $2 million? Or cash only? Cash only. In other words, a bondsman's ready to show up and put $100,000. And by the way, Arizona law says the preference is for an OR released. If there's a bond, it's the least onerous bond that would reasonably assure your appearance at trial. They decide that's $1 million, $500,000. A bondsman could put that down for you with a secured bond, but now the trend is to make them cash-only bond. But forget about that. We've got classes of cases right now that people are held with no bond. No bond at all. Yeah, you're presumed innocent, but you're charged with this, and you're held no bond. I have a client I'm going to see today who was arrested yesterday and is held no bond. No priors either. No priors. Then there's the Ninth Amendment, right? What? The Ninth Amendment. Who talks about the Ninth Amendment? Nobody talks about the Ninth Amendment, right? Just to be sure, just to be certain that all the rights that were laid out in the Bill of Rights, everybody knows that's not everything, right? There's a whole huge pile of other fundamental rights that you have. That's what the Ninth Amendment is about. Well, I checked. Guess how many rights they found for you in the Ninth Amendment? 0. You may as well just delete it from the Constitution. It doesn't exist. So pretty much the government can do whatever it wants. That's really where we are. It can pretty much do whatever it wants. The government is intrusive in every area of your life. I had another client came into my office this week, woke up in the morning, found out all his assets were seized, All his vehicles were taken. His accounts were frozen. He's presumed innocent. He's a wealthy guy, but he doesn't have a dime now, access to a dime of his money to hire an attorney. It can be very, very difficult to defend yourself. Not only that, but I can tell you, just anecdotally speaking, in my 20 years, the attitudes of prosecutors have changed. The attitudes of cops, lots of them, have changed. That friendly neighborhood pal who's just trying to help you out, that's pretty rare. Prosecutors, all they say to me now is, hey, your guy should have thought of that before he broke the law. Yeah, but the law screwed up here. Yeah, well, I know, but the law's the law. A lot of these judges, guess where they come from? The prosecutor ranks. So how can I possibly be optimistic? Seriously, I think the case for optimism is strong. Why? And I'm not saying we're not going to go through some dark days here. We are. We're going through them now, which is why I feel a sense of pride speaking about freedom and liberty, because it's our job to kind of keep that philosophy rolling through these times. We're in the minority, and it's okay. It's okay because we're right. And we need to keep what America was supposed to be about. What lots of the people who fought the American Revolution, those, the people I'm talking about, the people who used force to commit treason so they could overthrow their own government, those people, right? Those are our pals. Thomas Jefferson would have been hanged had France not helped us out. Treasonous, but we love them nonetheless. That's why we love them. Here's why I think we can be optimistic. Because change is coming, no matter what. Massive change is coming just from economics alone. I don't know how this debt ceiling thing's going to shake out, if they are going to, as Doug Casey once said to me many years ago, if they're going to just paper it over one more time. But eventually, they're not going to be able to do that. Eventually, it's going to happen where the government can no longer sustain the $17 trillion debt and growing all the time. They can't even slow it down. And I don't say this with any pride or joy. I'm unhappy that our country is going to have to go through a huge economic restructuring. If you think that this government closure is a big deal because the Panda Cam is off in Washington and the park is closed and the World War II vets had to beat down the door to get in there, if this is the pain that you can't endure, you don't have any idea what's coming. But it is coming. The optimism here is what could replace it. It presents an unprecedented opportunity for us to make a case about there's a better way. Empires collapse. They all do. They can't continue forever. We just simply can't afford to imprison people and to wage war the way we have. We don't even have to win the philosophical argument here. They have to change. They are gonna change. This is a huge opportunity. Look at what happened to the Soviet Union. They didn't have some great philosophical revolution. They had a collapse because they were a little bit ahead of us. But what replaced it? I've been to Estonia. Anybody here been to Estonia? Few people. I'm optimistic about things going on in Estonia. Talk to the average Estonian, new country that just sprung up after the collapse of the Soviet Union. They're pretty optimistic. Oh my God, I'm way behind schedule. Let me try to go fast through some of this stuff. Other reasons for optimism. Ron Paul, a real libertarian, he got into the presidential debates. He did change hearts and minds. Yeah, he had an R after his name. He's as much a libertarian as anyone I've ever met. And in the 25 and under crowd, he wins. What about Rand Paul? He's there, carrying the torch. Ted Cruz. These guys with joy are closing the federal government. The drug war is ending. 18 states, including conservative, backward Arizona, has even moved for medical marijuana. We got 2 states now in this country who have completely legalized marijuana for recreational purposes. There's a great economic argument here, but there's a much more important freedom argument. There's an argument here that, hey, wait a second, how about this? People in a free country have a right to control what goes into their bodies. If we can win that argument, we win the whole ball of wax, and we have an unprecedented opportunity to make that case coming up. And science continues to progress. And really, more people are thinking rationally. Religious fanaticism, even though it's still there, it's going bye-bye ever so slowly. And not only that, overall violence, yeah, we still got torture, we still got wars, but if you look at this in a macro type of a sense, historically speaking, torture is less acceptable now than it's ever been in human evolution. People still torture, they cut off heads, but generally speaking, the world is upset about it when we see it. And I think that's better news. It's a little bit, it's something. As we said in evidence class back in law school, a brick is not a wall, okay? It's a small step, and it's something. And I do think it's significant. It's something. And so overall, we're becoming more civilized. And becoming more civilized means that people are going to eventually understand that, you know what? Free market capitalism makes a lot of sense. It raises standards of living. Freedom, being in charge of yourself, not being in charge of your neighbor, that seems to work pretty well. We got the internet now. We can look around the world, right? Why is China moving towards capitalism? Because they're able to see what has happened in the United States. It's not because we love our kids more, and it's not because the Lord smiles on our country more. It's because we've had more freedom. That's why we got higher standards of living. It's too bad that the general population in the United States hasn't learned that lesson. So we voluntarily choose to live in this police state, but I am implicitly optimistic in the long term about eventual positive change. I see my time is sort of running out here. I think there's going to be and I'd love to take questions, but I think there's going to be a panel coming up after the next speaker, and I'm going to stay for that. But let me just say this. I think with everything, I'm not just talking about the state of freedom in the United States or lack thereof. With everything in life, if I say to you, give me 5 reasons to be pessimistic, you can find them. And if I say, give me 5 reasons to be optimistic, you can find those as well. So I would just make a suggestion to you. Let's focus on what's optimistic. Let's focus on the good things going on right now. And there are a lot of good things going on right now. Like I mentioned, the drug war, that's a train that's already left the station. That's rolling down the track. And we need to seize that opportunity and make this into an argument about self-ownership, not about cartels and violence and economics. Even though that's a great argument, perfectly sufficient, it's not the best argument. And if we really, really want to bring about freedom, just remember, we don't have to convince everybody. We don't. We just need a certain critical mass of people. You know, I've heard estimates about the American Revolution that said maybe 10% were for revolution, 10% were loyal to the crown, and 80% didn't really care. It's probably pretty close to the state of affairs today, right? Let's just work on getting our 10%. Let's get our 10%. So I would urge you to do whatever your skill set allows you to do. If you're a good speaker, speak. If you're a good writer, write. If you're a good arguer, get out there and shake it up. If you dare to run for public office, and I did this, I don't know if some of you saw, I was in a debate against Flake and Carmona, and my only regret is I listened to the voices who said, hey, Mark, Flake's a good guy. He was at Goldwater. Go easy on him. Don't just rip his head off. And I regret now that I listened to those voices. I should have completely ripped his head off, and I didn't, and I feel bad about it now. But you live and you learn. So if you're inclined to get into politics, get out there and rip some heads off. Thank you.